Yes, our first speaker today comes from the University of Helsinki, Mikko Viitama, and what's the department now? It's the Department of...
It's the Department of World Cultures.
World Cultures, yes. Yeah, okay. Well, that's the situation with the universities, that you really don't know where people are coming from when they are coming from a university nowadays. Okay, but Mikko is our next speaker, talking about the transformative power of music in Indian Sufism. So please, Mikko.
Is it working? I guess so. So I'm now going to speak on the historical context, and we are going to go to the 18th century India, and that's why I'm using here the word Indian, because there was no India, there was no Pakistan yet as countries at those times as we know them today. And I'm going to talk about some theoretical aspects of Sufi music, but I argue that it's also theory that is very much grounded in the practice, in the Sufi practice, in the practical knowledge of how to guide disciples in the path of Sufism. And I'm going to talk to you about three Sufi masters, whose name you can see here. First was Kalimullah Shah Jahanababi, who died 1730 in Delhi, in the imperial Mughal capital. And his followers, who died actually in the same year as his Sufi master, was Nizamuddin Aurangabadi, who lived in Aurangabad in Maharashtra in the middle of India, which was the imperial capital for some time because the Mughal emperor was fighting his campaigns in the Deccan in those days. So Aurangabad was the imperial capital in the end of 17th and the early 18th centuries. And the son and follower of Nizamuddin Aurangabadi was Maulana Fakhruddin Dehlavi, who then died in 1785. Sometimes the influence of these Sufi masters is called the renaissance of the Chishti Nizami brotherhood. Chishti Nizami is the name of the brotherhood to which these Sufi masters belong to. And I'm not actually sure if there was any need for renaissance actually during the early 18th century. The Chishti Nizami brotherhood was not somehow degenerated in those days. But what it was spread throughout India, and there was not a leading Chishti Nizami Sufi master in the imperial capital before Shah Kalimullah Jahanabadi arrived to the city. And he became extremely influential person in his days. What you see in the picture is it has been taken from the minaret of the Friday Mosque in Delhi, the imperial Jama Masjid. And on the other side, you can see where the red wall goes. There is what is nowadays known as the Red Fort, which was the imperial fort, the imperial palace of the Mughal emperors. And Shah Kalimullah Jahanabadi, you can see the small wooded area between these areas. That's where his tomb is today. And this area which you can see between the imperial mosque and the imperial palace in Delhi, it has now been leveled down, but until 1858 it was the part of the city where the most important princes of the Mughal aristocracy lived in their city mansions, and that was also a place where Kalimullah Shah Jahanabadi lived. And why there is nothing today is because after suppressing the uprising of 1857-58, the British leveled all the areas around the Friday Mosque and also the tomb of Shah Kalimullah and the magnificent library he had. It was all destroyed by the British. So he was very much in the center of what happened in the imperial capital. And furthermore, why these three Sufi masters are so important is that, first of all, they wrote. They were prolific writers, all of them. And I have mentioned a few of their books here, which are central to our discussion today. And all of these books are books which deal with the Sufi practice. First is Murakkai Kalimi, which is the patched cloak of Kalim. Murakka means a black patched cloak of the Sufis. Kashkule Kalimi, the alms bowl. Alms bowl is the begging bowl of the Sufi dervishes. And the final one of these is Nizam al-Qulub, the order for hearts. And in addition to writing copiously, these Sufi masters are important for the present-day Sufism in India and in Pakistan, because a number of most important Sufi brotherhoods that are still active in those areas, they lead their master-disciple chain to the last of these masters, Maulana Fakhruddin Dehlavi. And in order to understand the listening of music in the conceptualization of Sufi practice of these three masters, we also need to understand the broader picture of Sufi practice, of how they organize their lives and how they organize their religious rituals. All of those three books I mentioned to you, they are books in which the Sufi practice is systematized, especially the practice of zikr. Zikr means remembrance, but in practice, zikr means different repeating the religious formulas, such as La ilaha illallah, the first part of the Islamic creed, or different names of God. And this repetition can be done vocally, together in a group, in a setting that resembles a musical setting, or it can be perfectly internalized, it can be done silently, or it can be done alone, without any words producing, without producing any smallest sound even, just perfectly in the mind. And it can be combined with the movement, especially when it is done loud, or then it can be combined with moving the zikr out inside the body to the different body parts. And why it was important in those days to systematize the practice of zikr was that the initiation in the multiple initiations into several Sufi brotherhoods had become a standard in India by that time. So of course, Shah Kalimullah, he was mainly a Chishti Nizami, that was his main identification. But he also had initiations in the Qadiri, Suhrawardi, and Naqshbandi brotherhoods. And together with the initiation, he would get the meditative and religious techniques and different kinds of practices from all of these Sufi brotherhoods. And as a result, what one Sufi master had in his hands, what he could do, was quite tremendous at the time. I mean, a huge variety of different kinds of techniques and prayers. So for that reason, Shah Kalimullah and his followers, he felt that they should compile some kind of compendium of these practices. And for example, in the foreword to the Kashkul, the alms bowl, he writes that this book is like this alms bowl, into which masters from different Sufi orders have put their religious practices. And now I'm preparing a digest of these. I'm not going to write you everything I know, but I'm just going to write you the best bits and those which work the best. So that's what he does in what is actually done in all of these three books. But first, if we look at the Kashkul Ekalimi, the alms bowl, what he does to the different techniques of zikr is that he organizes them in the hierarchical order. The most gross level for the beginners is the vocal zikr, that you use your voice, you say it aloud, you say the name of God aloud in different patterns. But then you internalize the practice and make it fully so that you somehow operate in the area of this imagined spiritual heart, which is imagined to be in the middle of your chest. And he also not only organizes these practices into hierarchical order, but he also analyzes the experiences one might experience during zikr. So what may happen, one of the things that may happen during the zikr is that you start experiencing different lights that manifest. And depending on where the light manifests, Shah Kalimullah writes that it has a different kind of signification for you. It tells you something about what's happening around you, where is the focus to which you should concentrate. And if the light appears next to your right shoulder, it signifies the angel that records the good deeds. If it's on the left side, it's the angel that records your bad deeds. If it's appears in front of your chest or the navel, it means that there is some temptation that you should probably deal with. And if it manifests in front of the heart, it signifies the purity of heart. But what is important about the techniques of zikr in Shah Kalimullah's and his followers' texts is that they have to be practiced systematically. And he prescribes huge numbers of repetitions for zikr. Something like repeating the first part of the Islamic creed, La ilaha illallah, for 100,000 times a day, which would take a considerable time. And you have to keep doing these daily. It doesn't mean that you have to do all, he doesn't say that you will have to do all the techniques he prescribes in Kashkul and Murakka, but he says that these are techniques you should do them constantly, and you should keep practicing and repeating them. And what zikr is like, as a religious technique, in order to work, he describes that zikr is something like you very slowly polish the heart. And he uses the metaphor of mirror here, the old metaphor of mirror. In those days, the mirrors were made of metal. And if they would rust, or if they would lose their luster, you wouldn't see anything in the mirror. So zikr is compared to polishing the mirror so that it will reflect the God in the most perfect way. But it's a slow process. It's a process that needs constant engagement in. Then, contrasting it with sama, the other practice, now we come to the music actually. Sama literally means listening, but in the Sufi context it is used as a term for the technique in which the music, instrumental music, sang music, is used as a vehicle of spiritual practice. Either it is just listening to the music, or then the people take part in making the music. That varies a lot in different between different localities. First of all is that the 18th century Chishtini Nizamis, they don't discuss sama in the legal framework at all. Which usually when we talk about Islam and music, one thing that first goes, well, is it allowed or not? But Chishtini Nizami masters, they didn't write any legal treatises anymore. Well, that's probably because they had, from 1347, from the formative period of the Sufi Brotherhood, they had a treatise called Risala Usul Sama, the treatise of the legal foundation of the listening, written by a Sufi called Fakhruddin Zarradi, in which he argues that using music in the religious framework, using the music in the Sufi practice, is allowed by the Quranic statements, by the hadiths, the traditions of Prophet Muhammad, and by the sayings of the previous Sufi masters. And what is interesting that when in the 19th century Islamic reform took wind in India, and when many of the practices of Sufis, Sama being one of them, were attacked by the Islamic reformists, then again Fakhruddin Zarradi's book was reprinted in 1889, having both original Arabic text and the Persian translation with it. So it was still very actual in those days. The legal discourse in Islam is not that it would produce all the time somehow ingenious new arguments and reveal something new on some topic, but the same arguments are being repeated. And usually those who, for example, originally felt that okay, music is okay, then they would sigh with a relief when they got Fakhruddin Zarradi's Risala that okay, now we have the legal foundation, okay, music is allowed, we can keep listening to it. and those who would oppose music already, and then some other scholar would write a treatise saying that, well, music is not allowed in Islam. Then they would say from the review that, okay, that's what we thought, so that's how it is in Islam. So they didn't discuss religion, the legal issues as such. What was innovative about Shah Kalimullah was that Fakhruddin Zaradi's work deals with music in the context of Sufism. Fakhruddin did not bother with any other kind of music. He was just interested in establishing that music can be used in Sufi practice. Whereas Shah Kalimullah, without referring to anything legal, referring to any legal texts, he presented the opinion that actually music is allowed also for the aesthetic pleasure. And it's only those who don't understand the aesthetic aspects of music. For them, it's forbidden to listen to music. Of course, the best thing is if you use it in the Sufi framework, in the Sufi practice. But then it's also okay if you listen just for the aesthetic pleasure of it. And what is interesting also is that Kalimullah uses the word rag for the music, which in the Indian music denotes the musical modes of Indian music, like maqams in Persian, Arabic, Turkish music. So it doesn't even refer to music with any specific Sufi term, but uses the term rag, the general term of music in those days when he says so. He did some systematization regarding the music and listening to music, and he did it by defining the relationship of two things in respect to music, and these are ikhtiyar, the control, and shuur, the cognition. First is that you control what happens, you control what you do, and cognition is what you understand, what you perceive, and what you receive. And he defined the most fruitful way to listen to music in the Sufi practice by using these two terms. If a human being has both ikhtiyar and shuur, he has both control and cognition, it doesn't really differ from his everyday consciousness, because now we are here also, we are practicing control over ourselves, not yawning or whatever you feel like doing, and we also take use of cognition, listening to what I tell to you and understanding what I tell to you. So that's not really good for music. And if you have only control, then listening to music would be just a formal ritual. You control yourself, you do the certain things which are part of the musical assembly, you sit in a certain way and so on and so forth. But if you don't know what is happening, if you don't have a feeling of the effects of the music, then it's really of no use. And if you lack both the control and both the cognition, then just the experiences just flow through you, nothing sticks to you. And Shah Kalimullah says that that's what the drunkards do in their assemblies. They get drunk, they listen to music, and they deliberately want to lose both the control over themselves and also the cognition of what happens. So he says that what is the best way of you listening to music is that you have you lose the control over yourself. So you don't try to control what happens to you, but you still have the cognition. You know, you can perceive what is happening to you, and you can integrate these experiences to your being. Compared to the zikr, sama, it was for the 18th century Chishtis, was a practice in which they, for them it was spontaneous. You wouldn't do it, for example, as the emphasis on losing the control means that you can let the experiences come out. And to enhance the spontaneity in the listening of music, they would also not hold the musical assemblies every day, but have it only in irregular intervals, or maybe once a week, so that it would also be something novel, something that you would anticipate, and that's something that would create experiences in the listeners. And they discussed it totally in the language of passionate love. It was not anymore like, slowly polishing the mirror of the heart, but it was more like, on a one swift experience, taking all the dirt out from the mirror. And that musical assembly, the Mehvila Sama, also becomes a meeting place of the lovers, of the human lover and the divine beloved. And it's no more like a strenuous daily practice, but it's somehow a context where the fruits of all the other practices you do in the Sufi path is brought into fruition, and which allows a certain freedom of these practices to come out. And why I use the word cautious here in the systematization is that I think it was very deliberate, because these Sufis, they listened to music. It's known from their hagiographical text that they really had these musical assemblies, and they really wanted to entice skillful singers into their assemblies. So it was not that the Sama would have been somehow meaningless for them, and for that reason they didn't speak much about it or want to systematize it, unlike the systematized Sikh. But I think it was deliberate, because if you systematize Sama, you say that you have to listen to in this way, and then you experience things like this, and then you do everything in this particular order. You sing this first, then you sing this, then you sing this, then you sing this. Then it will lose the spontaneity of the practice. And you don't have the freedom of realizing your own experiences during the musical assembly, if it just becomes very strictly formulated ritual. And it wouldn't either allow a Sufi master to prescribe to control the musical assemblies in a way that they can somehow adapt them to different situations, depending who is present in the musical assembly, what kind of listeners there are. And on the whole, what was the result of this cautious systematization? First of all, that it was systematized at all, and it was really made a part of the edifice of Sufi practice, was that it stayed there, despite the reformist criticisms that became very virulent almost from the mid-19th century. It stayed part of the devotional regime of the Chishti Nizami Sufis and also many other Indian Sufi orders. So it stayed there, and it's still in there. But then Sama has not become ritualized. It only has a few songs which have their ritual place, which are connected with the rituals. But then the rest is something that you can select, which the head of the assembly, the Sufi master, or then the professional singers, what they can select for these different occasions when they perform. So it's also a very open tradition that keeps transforming all the time. So new songs or song texts are all the time introduced into the repertoires of Sufi musicians in South Asia. And of course, endorsing the music led to the patronage of music. Sufi masters, Sufi orders have been significant patrons of musical genres in India, in Pakistan, up to the present day. And as we began, we saw where Shah Kalimullah lived. In Delhi, he lived between the imperial mosque and the imperial fortress. It also, because the Chishti Nizamis of the 18th century, they belonged to the social elite. And many of their followers also, they belonged to the social elite. They were not necessarily rich, but they had power. And they often had rich patrons who would patronize the Sufi masters, who would use this fortune to patronize arts and music. And because they belonged to the elite, in the 18th century. They also preferred musical genres that were musical genres of the elite. In their case, that would mean the North Indian or Hindustani classical art music of the 18th century. And even nowadays, the particularly Sufi music genres of India and Pakistan, like Qawwali, they bear some of these. They bear very close affinity to the Hindustani art music. And I especially mention here the Delhi Gharana, the Delhi school of Qawwali, which is very close to the classical art music of North India. And what should be mentioned here also in the end of the 18th century is that much of what we know about Indian culture today, especially in the field of music, it took shape in the 18th century. And, for example, the favorite instruments like sitar and tabla, they were introduced in the 18th century. The dominant vocal genre of North Indian classical music, khayal, it was introduced in the 18th century. Qawwali music, what is nowadays known as the Sufi music of India and Pakistan, that took shape in the 18th century. And because these Sufi masters, Chishti Nizamis, were very active in the musical scene in the 18th century, they also somehow made this wider world of North Indian classical music part of the Sufi culture as well. And there was not such a clear cut as I have mentioned today, that there is, in the Turkish art music, there is a division between the religious and secular art music. In India, that division was not so clear. What would be art music, what would be Sufi music, what would be secular, what would be religious. And many of the Sufi shrines, like the shrine of Nizamuddin Aulia in Delhi, which is one of the most notable Sufi shrines in India, they also became cultural centers of music, where music served the ritual purpose, but because it was of such a high quality, the greatest musicians of the time performed in the Nizamuddin shrine, they also became cultural centers to where people who were not really perhaps even interested in the religion, they would attend the shrine because of the music that was available there. And I think this is something that is happening also in the present day. Here is a picture from the courtyard of the shrine of Nizamuddin in Delhi, where you can see the musicians in the front and then the audience on the two sides. And not all of them are pilgrims interested in music, but there are also a lot of people who are just interested to hear the Qawwali music. So thank you. I was wondering, should we see the clip or should we just go to the discussion?
Oh, well, I think we have time to...
It's 10 minutes.
10 minutes?
10.
Do you want to show it all?
Well, it's very interesting, but I mean, yeah, we can just leave it.
What do you say?
Is it available somewhere else?
It's available on YouTube, but you have to find the text and find it.
But I can give you the link and then we can distribute.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, good. But don't go anywhere.
Oh, I don't like to go there already.
No. You can. We still have Bo. I guess no. We're good in terms of time. So if you have any pressing questions at the moment, so please.
And if you don't have questions, then we can see the clip.
Well, that's an option, I guess, too. But yes, Jonas.
I'm curious. Do they develop a theory of sound?
They have some indications, and I think they had a lot of commonalities, and they discussed a lot with the yogis in this respect, and based their theory of sound to the unstruck sound, the sound that is always present, which in the yogic side is called anhat nad, and which the Sufis call the Sauta Sarmadi, the eternal sound. And that, it's like kind of a meta theory of Sama, that music gives an expression of that unstruck sound, which has been there since the creation, that is present everywhere. And that's also something that Kalimullah refers to in his Kashkul. He talks in the very end, he has a note on Sama, and he mentions the discussions about the Sauta Sarmati as well. But then I think much of the theoretization about the sound, it has been transmitted orally among the musicians. It's not necessarily found so much in the texts, only as a hint. But if you discuss even with the present-day musicians, you will probably get quite some information about the theory of sound as well.
Yes, Nina?
Yes. I know my question is a little bit out of scope of your presentation, but this topic interests me greatly. And have you done any comparative studies about the Sufi practices here, and let's say in Africa? There are a lot of Islamic communities that practice Sufism.
No, because I have had my hands full already in this context, and I haven't had any possibility to do any comparative studies yet. But I mean,
do they vary a lot? Or
I think they do. I think there is a lot of local variation, and even well, in India, Qawwali and the mode of listening to Qawwali, it's quite prominent as a genre of Sufi music. But then we have Milad, what you mentioned, Mawlid in the morning, the poems in the praise of Prophet Muhammad, which are sang without accompaniment, and then all these vocal zikrs can resemble music sometimes. But what is interesting in Qawwali is that the performers are professionals. Their most important quality is that they are good musicians. It's not so important if they are virtuosos of Sufi practice otherwise, but they need to be professional music. So that is one very significant point in Qawwali, that they are professional musicians. And then those who are the real religious actors in the occasions are the listeners, who are led ideally by a Sufi master. Whereas, for example, in some other parts, for example, in the Arabic Middle East, you have these rituals where everyone who belongs to one Sufi brotherhood, they join in singing, and then perhaps there is someone who is more musically gifted than the others, who sings the main line above the chorus, often. But here, as the term sama indicates, it's the main act of the practice is the listening itself. It's not the singing, it's the listening.
Can I ask a follow-up on this? So what are the values of the music, the aesthetic values of the music then? What do they prioritize when the listeners, when they hear? When you said that they're professionals.
Yeah, well, it depends on the listener, of course, also. And Qawwali is also a musical form that has been very adaptable, and the musicians have been adopting their music for also the world music scene, like Nusrat did, and to the various popular genres. So Qawwali is, and also in the Indian films, there is a lot of Qawwali in Indian films as well. If I just take one case, like you said in the morning that you always have to know the case before you give any answer. So if I take one example case, like let's say a person initiated into a Sufi brotherhood, belonging to, for example, one of the brotherhoods that gather in the Nizamuddin shrine. First of all, I think the priority actually would be the quality of the poetry they sing. That they sing not some popular, very simple poetry, but that they sing some poetry that has some ability to express complex topics, and which is written in a language that is not that does not resemble film music or popular music lyrics. And then they would see how much they adapt their performance to the conventions of North Indian art music. How much does it sound? The authenticity in Qawwali also comes from how much you use rag in the qawwali, and how much you use the tal, the rhythmical patterns of North Indian music, how much the soundscape is created around these two things. So first poetry, then the authenticity of the art music conventions for a person who belongs to somehow the inner circle of the Sufi Brotherhood. And then who come to the shrine, who like the rhythmical music, then he probably would listen, how is the rhythm? How loud do they bang the drums? How vigorous is the singing? And then perhaps the poetry is even not so important in that. So it really varies according to the listener, according to the background of the listener, what they do value.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you again.